Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and in this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to continue with talks, with negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. According to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the President of Ukraine Zelensky made lots of very important statements. Zelensky threatens Russia with sanctions if it does not accept the ceasefire. They are not ready to talk about ending the war and make the appropriate decisions. This means there is no political will. This means that Russia does not feel the need to end this war. This also shows the lack of political, economic and other pressure on the Russian Federation. Therefore, we are asking, if there is no ceasefire, if serious decisions are not made, if bilateral meetings are not held, we insist on sanctions. I'll remind you that according to information we have, the main goal of the talks in Istanbul is a ceasefire, according to Zelensky. I'll remind you that the Russians have completely different objectives. The Russians are trying to prepare a paper, to prepare a document between Ukraine and Russia. Most likely the Russians are trying to prepare a ceasefire agreement, but we see that nothing like this is happening right now. Furthermore, when talking about Istanbul itself, I'll remind you that yesterday the Russian delegation came to the city, and the Russians started to wait Ukrainians at 10 a.m. of the local time. But the Ukrainians didn't came to Istanbul, didn't came to this meeting almost till the end of the 15th of May of 2025. And of course, there are lots of statements that excuses the Ukrainian behavior. For example, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said the level of the team Russia sent to negotiate with Ukraine does not indicate progress. Putin should be directly involved in ceasefire talks. U.S. hopes Russia will agree to a comprehensive ceasefire in Ukraine on Friday, so today. U.S. to decide on possible Trump-Putin meeting following Ukraine talks in Istanbul. Telling the truth, I'm not sure that the Russians are going to accept any ceasefire, even just because of Ukrainian behavior during these talks. When talking about the Russian side, of course, they made also lots of statements yesterday when they realized that Ukrainians were not planning to came to talks. Russia-Ukraine talks in Istanbul to start tomorrow. So today, on the 16th of May of 2025, Medinsky and his team have been waiting for Ukraine's team for nearly 24 hours now. Another important statement: Russia is ready to resume the negotiation process in Istanbul and possible compromises. We are ready for discussion and for resuming in the Istanbul negotiations. We are ready for possible compromises and for discussing them. We are waiting and we are in a working mood. That was stated by the head of the Russian delegation. Another important thing is that the Russian delegation will be waiting for the Ukrainian delegation tomorrow, so today on the 16th of May of 2025 from 10 a.m. And they have already arrived to the territory of probably office where they're waiting for the Ukrainian side. But when talking about the Ukrainians, they have completely different plan. According to information we have, the Ukrainians are planning to have two talks today, and first talks already started at 10 a.m. and 45 minutes, and these are going to be Turkey, US, Ukraine trilateral meetings. Later, the Ukrainians are planning to have another talks, but then with the Russian Federation, and they're going to start at 12 p.m. at 12:30 p.m. of probably Turkey time. Turkey, Russia, Ukraine trilateral meeting is going to take place. So as you can see, Ukrainians today started everything from the beginning. They don't want to go to this meeting. They don't want to have any talks with the Russian delegation, and starting on the 16th of May, they started everything to ruin this process once again. So as for the talks between Turkey, United States of America and Ukraine, we see that these talks have already started, and we start with seeing first pictures and videos from these talks. In this video we can see the Ukrainian delegation, and I'll remind you that according to information we have, the Minister of Defense of Ukraine will continue, and he will be in charge of the Ukrainian delegation. So of course, let's wait and see, but saying the truth, I'm not sure that everything big or good is going to happen today. Most likely the Russians are not going to accept the ceasefire proposal. Most likely the Russians will continue When talking about the Russian Federation itself, you know that today we got probably very important signal, very important message to Ukrainians and to the Western countries. According to information we have, Colonel General Andrei Mordovichev has been appointed Commander-in-Chief of the ground forces of the Russian Armed Forces. I'll remind you that he used to be in charge of the Group of Forces Center. This Group of Forces Center managed to achieve significant results probably since the beginning of 2024. This group of forces managed to establish complete control over the city of Avdiivka, over Ocheretino, Selidova. This group of forces managed to semi-encircle the city of Pokrovsk. This group of forces managed to break Ukrainian defense in Toretsk. So very experienced and very smart general is in charge of the entire Russian ground army, ground forces. And this is a very strong message to Zelensky and the Western countries that if you don't start this negotiation process, most likely the Russians are planning to begin another full-scale and major offensive operation with general who has a lot of experience and who had significant victories since the beginning of the special military operation. Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to be next. But once again, another day passed without any negotiations, and we see that the Russians during the another day managed to improve their positions. And the most important updates are coming from the Dnipro region. For example, today the situation for the Ukraine armed forces is critical. That was stated by several pro-Russian resources. There is practically no supply in the coastal settlement. All parcels are sent only by through Baba Yaga. This is a type of drone. Manpower is hiding in basements, but there are so few of them that they simply do not come out for 3-5 days. The landscape plays into Russian favor. The fields and lack of forest became the biggest mistake for the Ukraine armed forces in defending the Berislav section of the coast line. So, according to this pro-Russian resource, at the beginning of the 16th of May of 2025, the Russians established complete control at least over this territory. Maybe not control, maybe not complete control, but the Russians can feel themselves very free and very secure in this area without any danger, without any problems and risks from the Ukrainian side. You know that this is very important because I'll remind you that even if the Russians and the Ukrainians agree and accept a ceasefire, the Russians most likely will save control over this territory because according to latest version of talks and negotiations, the parties are planning to establish or to freeze the line of combat contact along the line of combat contact. So which means that the Russians by the beginning of talks, by the beginning of possible ceasefire, will establish complete control over the Ukrainian side of the river of Dnipro. Most likely we are not talking about the city of Kherson, but obviously lots of territories may be taken by the Russians, which can play a significant role in the future as a foothold on the Ukrainian side. So this is very important thing, and we see that Ukrainians currently can't do anything with this. Now let's talk about the South Donetsk direction. During the previous 24 hours, we got a lot of very important updates, and the most important thing is coming from the village of Volnaya Polya. Today, pro-Russian sources published this video. In this video, we can see how Russian soldiers managed to establish complete control over the settlement of Volnaya Polya. We can see several episodes from the central, from the eastern, and from the western parts of the settlement where the Russians were raising their flags. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map and we have colored the settlement of Volnaya Polya completely under Russian control. Furthermore, we see now that the Russians managed to enter the operational space and now they can move further in the western direction, trying to outflank the settlement of Shevchenko from the south and from the southwest and to get as close as possible to Kamyshovka. Of course, there are lots of trenches, fortifications right in front of the Russians, but not like trenches and fortifications. We see that there are lots of probably Dragon Ts and different anti-troopers, let's say, equipment. But anyway, the Russians will continue. When talking about the Bogatyr direction during the previous 24 hours, the situation hasn't been changed. Pro-Ukrainian sources confirmed that yes, indeed, the Russians managed to improve their positions to the south of the settlement of Bogatyr, but we still can see the picture that Ukrainians confirm almost complete control over the settlement and that the Russians have very poor positions in the most southern part. I'll remind you that the Russian sources show us completely different situation. The Russians show us the opposite situation to what Ukrainians are showing us. The Ukrainians, according to the Russian sources, control just around 20-30% of the settlement, and the Ukrainians are about to fall back from this area. Furthermore, today several pro-Russian resources reported that as a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to enter the southern part of the settlement of Odradne. As for that, without any proofs that can confirm this. Now let's talk about the Dnipro direction, and we had a lot of very important updates from this area. As you can see, we have adjusted the map, and during the previous 24 hours, during the previous night, according to information we have, the armed forces of the Russian Federation managed to improve their position significantly. According to geolocations and according to different videos that were published both by the Russian and Ukrainian sources, we see that the Russians tried to break through Ukrainian defense using a lot of vehicles, tanks, so the Russians were using convoys of armored forces with the purpose to break Ukrainian defense and to answer the settlement of Novosergeyevka, Novonikolayevka. In this video, we can see how Ukrainians were trying to stop and to slow down the Russians with FPV drones, and indeed the Ukrainians managed to destroy several vehicles, several tanks of the armored forces of the Russian Federation, but one of the geolocation from that video took place exactly in this place. So we came to the conclusion that the Russians managed to improve their positions. As for now, we don't know for sure whether the Russians answered the settlement of Novonikolayevka and Muravka, but obviously the Russians managed to shorten the distance, and even if the Russians haven't answered these two settlements during the previous attack, most likely they're planning to do this in the very near future. So as you can see, the Russians are getting closer and closer to the border with the Dnipro region. And according to calculation, currently the distance between possible Russian positions and the Dnipro region is less than 1 kilometer. So this is the shortest distance between Dnipro region and the region of Donetsk. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Kliban-Bykska and the eastern flank of Pokrov's direction. We have several updates, as you can see. Today, the Russian sources continue publishing videos from the settlement of Miralyubovka. Pro-Russian sources published this video where we can see how exactly the Russians were taking under control this settlement. In this video, we can see lots of episodes how the Russians were moving from one building to another, how the Russians were clearing one structure after another, and in probably the final part of this video, we can see how a Russian soldier was waving with the Russian flag in several and different parts of the settlement. This is probably the most important episode, and this episode was geolocated. This is exactly the place where a Russian soldier was waving with the Russian flag. Based on this video, we have adjusted completely the settlement of Miralyubovka and the complete Russian control. So now we have no doubts that the Russians are planning to continue advancing further, probably in the northwestern direction and in the southwestern direction, with the purpose to outflank this complex network of the fortifications and to connect logistic between Grodovka and Miralyubovka itself along this road through this mine. So this is a very important pocket that the Russians are planning to take under control. As for the pocket between Miralyubovka and the settlement of Malinovka, we still haven't received anything, but obviously there are very heavy clashes. When talking about the Kliban-Bykska direction, the Russians continue their offensive operation, and as yesterday, the Russians continue their offensive operation mainly from the western flank in the northeastern direction. During the previous 24 hours, according to different sources, the Russians managed to improve their positions and to take additional 3 lines and fortifications in this site. So the Russians are advancing here, trying to outflank the Ukrainians in the area of Zarya, Stara Nikolaevka, and to improve their positions, trying to take as many as possible territories and to get as close as possible to the N20 road. So this is the situation in this direction. The situation for Ukrainians is very difficult. Furthermore, the Russians intensify their activities on the eastern flank. As for now, the Russians are trying to move along this tree line that goes in parallel with N20 road with the purpose to outflank the settlement of Romanovka from the west. Today we got lots of videos how the Russians using FPV drones were clearing these trenches and these fortifications with the purpose to force the Ukrainians to fall back and to clear the way for the Russian troopers in the future. So we expect that probably today or during the next several days the Russians will try to moving in this area with the purpose to get as close as possible to the road between Romanovka and Zarya with the purpose to cut Ukrainians and to force them to fall back. So the battle for Romanovka obviously has begun. We are waiting for additional changes on the ground from this area. When talking about the city of Chasiv Yar and the Chasiv Yar direction, today we got just one article, and probably this is already a third day in a row when different sources confirmed Russian additional control in the central part of the city. So we have adjusted this area and we have marked this area as a gray zone, a contested area. According to probably most number of experts, the Russians secured completely the central part. As for now, without any attempts to move further in the direction of Shevchenko, but we expect that this is going to happen in the very near future. The Russians during the previous 24 hours, as you can see, have already established complete control over the N20 road. In this video, we can see how the Russians attacked the concentration of Ukrainian forces with missiles with cluster rounds. In this video, we can see that Ukrainians suffered huge losses as a result of Russian offensive operation, as a result of Russian attack. So we see, and I'll remind you that according to information we have, Ukrainians several days ago announced complete evacuation of the population from the settlement of Drushkovka. And now we see that the Russians began bombing and attacking this territory. We expect that Ukrainians are planning to coordinate their Konstantinovka defense operation exactly from this settlement, so that is why the Russians are over-focused in this area. As for the Sivir direction during the previous 24 hours, nothing special. As for the northern directions, we have very interesting video from the Russian territory, from the village of Shakhovka. In this video, we can see that Ukrainians destroyed a bridge in this area. Most likely, the Ukrainians are waiting and are expecting Russian offensive operation. Probably for these purposes, they destroyed this bridge. I'll remind you that the northeastern part of the Kharkiv region is the primary target for the Russians as well, and most likely the Russians are going to begin offensive operation in this direction in the very near future. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.